Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It's our first live show of 2025. Brand new year. It's probably going to be our lowest volume show by topic, because if the state of Alberta politics, and apparently as we're hopping on the air tonight, federal politics as well, is let's go with fluid, in flux, some might say. To start off with, we're recording this on January 5th. Apparently, the Prime Minister might be stepping down tomorrow, so we'll probably have something to talk about next Sunday. But tonight, we got plenty to talk about. We're going to jump right into it, because there's some interesting little things that have been going on in the province of Alberta. The first thing that we got to start with is some changes that the University of Alberta announced. Now, this gets uncomfortable, let's say, for a bunch of different reasons. The big boss of the University of Alberta published an op-ed this week where he talked about, this just came out on January 2nd, where he talked about why the University of Alberta is moving from EDI or DEI or DIE, depending on where you land on the political spectrum and how you want to weaponize terminology. They're moving away from that. They're moving to a new slogan: access, community, and belonging. From the editorial, for many years, our efforts around equity, diversity, and inclusivity, brackets EDI, were aimed at advancing the university's mission as articulated by President Tory. However, the time has come for us to evolve, not just in words, but in actions that better reflect the kind of community we strive to be, continuing to build on President Tory's aspirations. This is why we're moving forward with a new framework and a new language: access, community, and belonging. This shift is more than a change in terminology. It reflects a deepened commitment to creating a university community where everyone can thrive. For some, the language of EDI has become polarizing, focusing more on what divides us than our shared community. Some perceive ideological bias at odds with merit. Words matter, and this evolution aims to craft a shared narrative with aligned actions that resonate more universally, emphasizing common ground and fostering authentic connections. Which, in the spirit, he said cautiously, of the things, is not terrible. But there's a couple of it didn't take very long before people pointed out that that acronym also has a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Divisive, perhaps polarizing, focusing more on things that divide us than on shared community. For anybody who's unfamiliar, when you break access, community, and belonging down into the letters, you get ACAB, which is a phrase. It's a little divisive. Anybody who's not familiar, the phrase is all cops are bastards. Technically, it started as all coppers are bastards because it first appeared in England in the 1920s. And then it was abbreviated by workers who were going on strike, and they were having their picket lines broken by police. Now, I want to be really, really clear. Us pointing this out is not us saying that all coppers are bastards, because I do not believe that is true. I think that there's a lot of police officers who do exemplary work, who embody community policing. But it's fascinating that the University of Alberta, with all of its tools at its disposal, would overlook that historical meaning. Sometimes, as we looked up in the Wikipedia, it's also numerically rendered as 1312, with each digit representing the position of the corresponding letters in the English alphabet. But where it gets a little bit more complicated is the University of Alberta was one of the universities in Alberta that very recently had some problems with questionable deployment, I'll say, of aggressive policing that was not in any way in alignment with how many would view the concept of community policing historically. University of Alberta was one of the universities that saw quite a few criticisms levied at it because of the deployment of police to break up the protests that were occurring. There's concerns that the way that matter was handled actually was a violation of protesters' constitutional rights. There were quite a few scholars from the university who openly condemned the decision to send police in the way that police were sent in. There were quite a few faculty who raised the alarm. But there's a bigger point that we wanted to hang out with this for just a sec, because we've seen this game get played over and over and over again, where the idea is, hey, in order to get people to not be assholes, what we need to do is come up with a happy slogan, whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, or any of the other variations that have existed in the past. Let's come up with a slogan that we can say is a good thing. There's a period of time where using the phrase woke was considered by many to be a good thing, because it simply meant that you had an awareness of the social inequity that existed in the world around you. That term has been weaponized. Terms get weaponized. And so as we were watching the events of the week unfold, why don't we just say, maybe we just need to say, don't be an asshole. Maybe that's what we need to boil it down to, because there's some folks that are approaching the issue of racism, for example, and they're attacking it under the guise of woke, but there's a lot of people who are saying maybe they're just being assholes.
And by the way, put aside race, this obsession with race that wokeism has reinserted.
Well, invented even.
Invented in many ways.
When I moved to Toronto, it was as race blind as any country, as any city could be.
Right.
Right. And that's flipped. And it's flipped because of that obsessive concern with race. Right. That was something we 100% did not need in Canada.
Yeah.
Right. We basically, what would you say, imported and invented racism in Canada. Right. As a consequence of policy.
Wokeism seeks to divide people into these different groups and subgroups, and we see the results in a 250% increase in hate crimes. But we're going to get back to the basic principle that people are judged based on their individual character and humanity rather than by their group identity. And that is actually, ironically, the most unifying thing we can do to bring our country back together. And as Lincoln put it.
Now, there's a whole lot to unpack in that clip. That's Jordan Peterson, who is moving down to the United States. That also apparently, I'm sure Dr. Peterson will at some point say, has no history or complications with racism. And soon to be likely Prime Minister of Canada, at least for a solid 5 minutes, Pierre Poilievre. They did a little chat. I'm curious where the chat took place, because Mr. Peterson has been very clear he's moving down to the States because he just can't handle the woke in Canada, despite the fact that woke is a term that, to the best of my knowledge, comes out of the United States. Do with that what you will. Mr. Peterson's going to move down there. Before he did, he decided to sit down with the soon-to-be Prime Minister of Canada after the next election anyways, Pierre Poilievre. We're going to get into it. Don't worry. But before we talk about the content, the explicit, let's say, content of that clip, there's a little something that we need to address a little bit, because there's a little something that speaks to the kind of communication. I mean, you heard Mr. Poilievre say there, what we really want to do is it's all about the merit of a person's character. It's all about who they are. We would never want to see people using explicit or implicit dog whistles, like leaving, I don't know, an apple on the table, perhaps, because there's an apple on the table. And that might seem like a fairly benign thing, but this is where we have to talk a little bit about the history of Mr. Poilievre's campaigning across Canada, because it wasn't too long ago that he was in, I want to say it was Kamloops or Kelowna. It was one of those K places in BC. And he was being asked some questions by Don Urquhart, who's the editor of the Times Chronicle. And this exchange in particular blew up not just nationally, but internationally.
On the topic, I mean, in terms of your sort of strategy currently, you're obviously taking the populist pathway.
What does that mean?
Well, appealing to people's more emotional levels, I would guess. I mean, certainly you tap very strong ideological language quite frequently.
Like what?
Left wing, this and that, right wing. I mean, it's that type of ideological spectrum.
I never really talk about left
or
right.
Anyways, I don't
really believe in that.
Okay, a lot of people would say that you're simply taking a page out of the Donald Trump book.
Like which people would say that?
Well, I'm sure a great many Canadians, but
like who?
I don't know who, but
well, you're the one who asked the question, so yeah. You must know somebody.
Okay, I'm sure there's some out there, but anyways, the point of this question is, I mean, why should Canadians trust you with their vote, given not just the sort of ideological inclination in terms of taking the page out of Donald Trump's book, but
what are you
also
talking about? What page? What page? Can you give me a page? Give me the page. You keep saying
in terms of turning things quite dramatically in terms of Trudeau and the left wing and all of this. I mean, you make quite a it's quite a play that you make on it. So I'm
not
just
sure.
wondering.
I don't know what your question is.
Then forget that. Why should Canadians trust you with their vote?
Common sense. Okay. Common sense for a change.
Now, there's a lot going on in that clip. One of the things that's happening, for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this, is Poilievre has that whole interview where he's just eating an apple. That's his whole thing. He's just eating the apple. I would also make the argument he's being a bit of a dick, because he's not allowing the reporter to ask the question. He's not allowing the reporter to get the question out and then provide an answer. He's disrupting the reporter's question. Now, there's a lot of people who have said, "Oh, that's great," because see what he did there is he said, "Oh, no, I don't say left and right." I mean, he doesn't so much. He does say woke a lot, though. You can go back and find plenty of examples over the last couple of years where Pierre Poilievre has talked about the dangers of woke. I believe we might have just played a very recent one before we brought this clip up. But there's a lot of people who liked it because you see how he was taking down the mainstream media when he asked explicitly, "What page? I'd like the page number, please, from Donald Trump's playbook am I stealing from?" Which is, again, it's an insincere argument. It's a bad faith argument. But nonetheless, you don't have to go very far in social media to find a boatload of people who were so inspired by Pierre Poilievre's performance. That's a lot of alliteration in that clip. And they started putting apples in their social media handles. And so an apple has become a huge symbol, little inside joke for a lot of Pierre Poilievre supporters. And so for him to have an apple on the table, I mean, you don't get to say, "No, we don't do dog whistles," when you put one on the table. But let's talk about the explicit content of that clip, because it's gotten a lot of attention on social media and there's some very real problems with it. I mean, and I realize as I'm saying this, I'm about to be a very privileged middle-aged white guy who's going to comment on racism. But as much as it's, I think, maybe not appropriate for these two, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Poilievre, to be saying, "Oh, there's no such thing as racism," I think it maybe is incumbent on the middle-aged white guys who know better to say, "Oh, that's kind of bullshit, that is," because it's absolutely Bullshit. It's not true. For Jordan Peterson to claim that when he moved to Toronto, there was no such thing as racism. Racism wasn't a problem in Toronto when he moved there is just a lie. And it's a lie that's rooted in the idea of, well, I didn't have to deal with racism. I didn't have to address racism. I didn't have to address the sort of prejudice that people who are the targets of prejudice have to deal with every single day. And you don't have to work very hard to get a sense of how bad are things actually, how bad were things actually. So there's lots of racism going on in Toronto. There's a lot of hate crimes that go on in Toronto. A very good example of this, and there has been an increase, but that increase is tied to some very specific things. In 2023, there were 365 hate crime occurrences reported to the service. So this is the Toronto Police Service. And you can see from 2013 to 2020, things were fairly level. But then all of a sudden, things started to peak up a little bit. And then in 2023, there was a huge uptick. And people like Pierre Poilievre and Jordan Peterson would like you to believe, that's a new problem. You see, it's Justin Trudeau because there was never any racism back in 1980, 1998, except, yes, there was. In fact, we looked it up. There were 228 hate bias criminal offenses reported to the Toronto police in 1998, which was the year that Jordan Peterson moved to Toronto. The highest number of offenses against an identifiable group were committed against the Black community. Gosh, that sounds a lot like racism to me. Followed by attacks against the gay community. There were 26 cases against the South Asian community and 24 anti-Semitic offenses. There were 34 cases based on nationality and 33 were multi-based. So there was more than one reason to be hateful in Toronto in 1998. Now, getting the results for 1 year is one thing. We don't have a great view of what the 2024 numbers were because it literally just the year ended. So those stats are big. But we were able to find a report that came from the Deputy Chief of Police of Toronto, where on October 8th, 2024, they noted that there were 358 confirmed hate crime occurrences, a 42.6% increase since this time last year. So you have to wonder where Mr. Poilievre is getting his 250% increase. Because even if we go all the way back to 1998, when there was no racism, there was racism, lots of it. The increase is 137 cases, 228 to 365. In the last year, the increase is 42.6%. So how much fun we're having with statistics when we say there's a 250% increase is a really important question to ask. But when we take a look at who's being targeted and whether or not there have been any major events in the last little while, year and a half maybe, some of the explanations start to become pretty clear because 74.5% of those were against the Jewish community. 17.9% were against the Black communities. LGBTQS plus saw a 14% increase, and 7.8% saw anti-Muslim, Palestinian, Arab hate crimes going on. So there's been some stuff that's happened in the world. And given that a lot of those increases, 74.5% of the increase, has been towards the Jewish community, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out maybe there's a little bit of a correlation here between things that are happening in the Middle East and how some of these hate crimes are playing out. So it's not that we need to build the homes, axe the tax, and all of the other three-word slogans. That's not what's going on when we're talking about hate crimes in Toronto. But it's also really important to highlight that when we're talking about those numbers, the Black community saw a 17.9% increase in the number of targeted hate crimes that they experienced. LGBTQ2S plus communities saw a 14% increase in hate crimes. So when we're talking about these things, you might notice not a whole lot of the not visible minority group, identifiable minority group. And the reason for that is very simple, because that's how racism works. And it's mind-blowing that in a country that was founded on racism, John A. Macdonald, it's important to remember, the father of Confederation was also the father of residential schools who wanted to educate the savage out of First Nations and Indigenous peoples. This country has a history that is steeped in racism, as almost every single country does. But being uncomfortable with it to the point where we're just going to say, hey, you know what if we just say everybody needs to be treated based on the content of their character? That works great as long as everybody subscribes to that, but they don't. Lots of people carry all kinds of different biases. That's just the reality of the world that we live in. And some of those biases absolutely veer into hate. If you could unracist a racist by saying, hey, you know what? I really get that you hate whatever demographic, but really, can't we just judge them on the content of their character? We wouldn't have a problem with hate crimes because all of those people would go, oh, that's what I've been doing wrong. I've been judging them on their skin. I should be judging them on the content of their character. That is an argument that is used by people who are in positions of privilege to say, I don't want to deal with the underlying issues here. It makes me uncomfortable. I'd much rather eat apples. But maybe one of the side effects, if Mr. Peterson's right, and racism wasn't a thing. And again, to be clear, it absolutely has been a thing in this country's history and almost every country's history. Again, but let's pretend, just for fun, that that there was no such thing as racism in 1998, and it's only a product of the woke, and only the woke criticize those sorts of things, only the woke weaponize those sorts of things, only the woke use those sorts of things to drive division. I guess we're never ever going to hear about the blackface with Justin Trudeau again. I guess that's never going to come up again. We're never going to see these pictures posted on social media ever again, because both of the pictures that we have up on our screen right now are from the 90s. The Liberal Party of Canada confirmed it when they first came up. And just in case you were wondering how the Conservative Party of Canada felt, we don't have to go back very far at all to get comment from Andrew Scheer. Because from the article that we took those photos from, a few hours after the photos surfaced, Scheer said he was extremely shocked and disappointed. Wearing brownface is an act of open mockery and racism. It was just as racist in 2001 as it is in 2019. And what Canadians saw this evening was somebody with a complete lack of judgment and integrity and somebody who is not fit to govern this country. So let's be clear. The issues of racism are complex. There's no getting around that. They're also super simple. But one thing is 100% for sure. And that thing is that if we only talk about racism being a problem when it makes us feel uncomfortable and we want to make the conversation go away and not the actual problem go away, we're not doing anything but perpetuating the actual problem. Moving on from there. Interesting report came out this week in regards to drug overdoses in the country and in the province of Alberta as well. There's some things that have been going on in regards to the numbers. And it's really important to highlight that these numbers are softish numbers because the reporting around drug overdoses and drug poisoning deaths, I should say, those are fluid. Not all provinces collect data the same way. Not all provinces present the data in a timely fashion. But there were some important numbers that came out. And overall, the number of deaths from 2023 to 2024 is in most provinces down. In all of Canada, there's been an 11.1% decrease. Now, there's a lot of different factors that go in here, and there's a lot of different things that stick out with particular provinces. One of the things that should jump out at you if you're looking at the graphic that was provided by the Globe and Mail in their article, Alberta is actually the third worst province in all of Canada and the territories when it comes to how many people are dying from drug poisonings. So it's easy to take a victory lap when you see a decrease from 950 to 622. But the reasons get to be really, really important. And we've already seen the Premier of Alberta, as well as other actors within the UCP, come forward and be like, it's because of all of the good that we're doing. But if that was true, and if the only strategies that were being utilized that were making a difference were the ones that Daniel Smith and the UCP are using, you would expect to see a much bigger drop in the province of Alberta, and you certainly wouldn't expect to see that drop happening all the way across the country because many different provinces are approaching these problems in many different ways. And going back to that graph again for a second, it's important to note that BC saw a drop as well. Literally every province saw a drop, except for Atlantic Canada, which saw an increase of 9 deaths. That was an increase of 14.9%, but that's an increase from 74 to 85. So 9 is a relatively smaller number, a still profoundly tragic number. But when you compare it to the sort of numbers that Alberta has been putting up historically this year, last year, years before, it's a pretty big difference. Quebec saw a slight increase as well from 236 to 319. And Manitoba saw a slight increase from 174 to 198. And I want to be really, really clear. When I'm saying slight increases, I am not in any way trying to minimize the tragedy of every single death from the opioid crisis or from drug poisoning deaths. That's not at all what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to do is make sure that there's a little bit of context for the discussion. Because, as I said, Daniel Smith and the UCP coming out and saying, look, all of the wonderful things that we're doing, they're making such a big difference. But here's the problem. From the article in the Globe and Mail, to the south, the United States is reporting a sharp decline in drug toxicity deaths. Overdose deaths dipped by roughly 17% between June 2023 and June 2024. To about 94,100, according to the latest preliminary data from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Here in Alberta, Elaine Hishka, associate professor at the University of Alberta School of Public Health, said shifts in the makeup of street drugs are likely major drivers of the decline. She said there's huge variability with supply, and newer chemicals could be reducing the overall potency of substances. As well, targeted clampdowns may have reduced the availability of fentanyl or some precursor chemicals. Dr. Hishka said that the drug users are also mitigating the risk of overdoses themselves, for example, by smoking instead of injecting fentanyl or by taking smaller amounts of drugs more frequently instead of large doses. And there's a much darker piece that could also very easily be part of the explanation. And that much darker piece is a lot of the people who have been using opioids are already dead. So when you have a significant number of the population of those opioid users who are using illicit, non-pharmaceutical opioids, and they're dying, it's not a surprise that those numbers are starting to slowly peter off. But it's not, nobody knows with any certainty. There's no evidence. There's no data that says this is entirely because Daniel Smith and the UCP have said, hey, you know what? We're going to be bringing out legislation that's going to force people to get treatment. There's no data that suggests that. And I would make the argument that nobody should be taking a victory lap around, well, we only lost 622 Albertans in 2024 from January to June. So that's great. Nobody should be making that argument. And this is, again, one of the areas where all of the experts, all of the evidence says you need to have a multifaceted approach. You need to address the causes of why people resort to using illicit substances. You need to address the trauma. You need to make sure people know where to get help that isn't drugs when they have trauma. You need to make sure that there are harm reduction measures in place. You need to ensure that there's treatment available. And then you also, and this is so critically important, you need to make sure that once somebody has completed a treatment program, that the supports are in place to help them maintain their sobriety. It is a tragic story that we hear all too often where people go through a program, varying lengths, and for a long list of reasons, whether it is that the trauma hasn't been addressed, whether or not they have the social supports in place, whether or not they have the financial supports in place, once they get out of that program, it doesn't take them very long to fall back into their disease. Until we address all of those different components, the prevention, the harm reduction, the treatment, and the support post-treatment, doing just one of those things isn't going to accomplish what we want to see at all. Moving on from there, but staying with the healthcare file. And this is wild. This one has gotten a lot of people really, really upset with good reason, because an opinion piece was published just a couple of days ago, actually, where the executive director, I believe, of an organization called Second Street named Colin Craig published an opinion piece where he talked about the wait list data that's available. And in particular, he talked about the reality that exists that we don't do a very good job of keeping track of historically, we've not done a very good job of keeping track of the outcomes of people who are waiting for procedures. They're on the wait lists, whether it's to get a pacemaker installed, which is one of the examples he used in the article, or to get a hip replacement, or any of the other many things that people are on wait lists for in this province when it comes to healthcare. We didn't do a very good job of keeping track of, okay, but how many of those people are dying? In 2019, when Second Street was looking to see how many people died while on wait lists for life-saving procedures. So this isn't just, I'm waiting to get a mole removed or whatever. This is a life-saving procedure. Alberta Health noted that the data previously collected was incomplete, as staff were never trained province-wide to carefully track the information. It just happened to be collected here and there through waitlist management software. But as the article says, but at least it was something. This year, Second Street went back to Alberta Health and said, hey, what's the latest data? And Alberta Health, I'm going to read right from the article here. Alberta Health officials indicated that they no longer have this information. Alberta Health Services confirmed they don't have the data either. Instead of improving the situation, they've just stopped tracking the problems, which is a mind-blowingly bad approach, because you don't get to say, well, we don't have anybody dying on wait lists because we don't have any evidence of that, when you aren't even looking for the evidence, which again would be available to Alberta Health, the government organization that has taken over Alberta Health Services so that Danielle Smith can have a direct overreach. They very easily could collect this information. They've chosen not to. And that should be chilling. It should also give every single person who's come across this story very good reason to say, whenever Danielle Smith or the UCP say, oh, we've made such great advances in healthcare, we've made such a big difference. You don't know that because you've willfully turned a blind eye to the people who are dying while they're waiting for life-saving procedures. You've said that they are not statistically relevant anymore. We're just not going to bother. Danielle Smith and the UCP should not be able to take a victory lap over any of those things ever again, period, end of sentence. Moving on from there. Remember when I said this was going to be like a lighter episode because nothing's really happened? There's still been some things that have happened. And it turns out that the month of January is all about the trips for the for the UCP, because it was announced that Mickey Amery and Mike Ellis are going to be traveling down to Texas. And it gets wild really quick because they're going down to Texas to better learn about border security and policing. But they're going down 2 days early to just chill. In the press release, it talked about the fact that Mickey Amery and Mike Ellis were both going down 2 days early and that they wouldn't be compensated for their time. They wouldn't be paid for those 2 days where they're on free time. So right out of the gates, we can safely say they're leaving a little bit early so that they can hang out in Texas for whatever reason for 2 days, and the taxpayers are covering the cost of the flights. At the very least, they may not be covering the hotels for the 2 days. Those two ministers might not be getting paid extra per diems for those 2 days. They still make their yearly amount. But they're getting their airfare covered for a couple of days. And they're also taking some friends because Amery and Ellis are being accompanied with 7 staffers, which is a wild number. Because they're really just going down to have meetings with this various different government organizations and some of the police down there. But what gets really telling is some of the comments that have been made. Amery says, he said Alberta and Texas have a similar history. I have many questions because we don't. It's also worth remembering that this week the UCP did a big victory lap about how they were providing grants to people who highlight Alberta's especially unique history. So we have an especially unique history, but we also have a similar history to Texas, which nope, if you know anything about your American history, there's very little overlap there. But we also have shared values. Ellis says the province needs to keep an open mind when it comes to public safety issues and how to address them. Now, as much as I make jokes about the similarities, there are some. One of them happens to be that Texas also had some problems with their police when it came to suppressing protests. They had some big issues about that. But there's more than just that should be concerning, because if we're saying, oh, we've got so much in common with Texas, well, Texas has also made some fascinating and horrifying decisions when it comes to healthcare. Texas has had an abortion ban since 2021, and there have been a multitude of pregnant women dying in Texas after that abortion ban. Analysis from this article found that the maternal death rate in Texas increased 56% from 2019 to 2022, compared with just 11% nationwide during the same period. So let's be crystal clear. Texas is not somebody that you necessarily want to be saying, oh, we have so much in common with them because they do such a great job of killing their women. So what is the trip really about? Well, the odds are the trip is really about something called Operation Lone Star. And as I start to explain the broad strokes of what Operation Lone Star is, you'll probably get to see very quickly the overlap that's going on here. Because Operation Lone Star was the Texas governor's response to federal immigration policies. And what Operation Lone Star basically said is, we have all of these state resources. We've got the state guards, state troopers. We've got the sheriffs, I guess. Making a bit of a joke there. And what we're going to do is, because we don't believe that the federal government is doing a good enough job of protecting our borders, we're going to deploy all of our law enforcement resources that are directly under state control to the border to stop the migrants. Sound familiar? Because Daniel Smith just put forward a program for $29 million to put 51 new sheriffs on a border patrol program in the province of Alberta. So as much as Ellis and Amery seem to be saying, hey, you know what, it's because we have all of these shared values, you have to really wonder how much of this has to do with we really want to learn how you guys are using your jurisdictional policing authorities to police your border. Moving on from there, but sticking with the travel piece, Danielle Smith, it was announced she got tickets. Originally, she was going to go down for the Trump inauguration. She was going to hang out in the nosebleeds. She got some actual tickets to the inauguration. She's going to be like in the slightly less nosebleedy section. This comes because of the embassy that Alberta had that we put up in Washington, D.C. They were able to acquire her some tickets. So she's going to be going down to President Trump's inauguration. And this is where it gets interesting because there haven't been any publicly stated budget costs for this trip from the province. Danielle Smith hasn't done a press conference in it's been a minute. But there are some rumors in regards to how much the trip is looking to cost. One of those rumors has it north of $250,000. $250,000 of taxpayers' money so Danielle Smith can go and hang out at the Trump inauguration, which is a stunning number, especially when you think about a story that we talked about last week. This is the story where it turns out that physicians at the Royal Alex Hospital said, hey, you know that orthopedic surgery section that we've had closed down in part since June? If you can give us $240,000 a year, we can get that up and running. We can have that going 24/7. We just need to hire a couple extra people. What do you think? Can we do that? And Alberta Health and the government said, no, we're not going to do that. So we can drop $250,000, more than it would have cost, at least $250,000 to get Danielle Smith and probably at least 7 staffers, I'm just speculating, down to Trump's inauguration with the hotels and the travel and all of the things. But we can't afford to do the $240,000 for the orthopedic surgeries. And it's worth noting that when we're talking about those orthopedic surgeries, the physicians who put that proposal forward, they estimate that there were over 1,000 patients who were having their procedures disrupted or delayed. So these are not small numbers here. And it really does speak quite heavily to the priorities of what's going on in the provincial government currently. Moving on from there, the big announcement came this week. The head Nenshi, he's going to be running. Anybody who's been paying attention to Alberta politics knows that Rachel Notley resigned her position as an MLA effective, it was December 30th, leaving a vacant seat in Edmonton Strathcona. Well, a lot of people said, but will Nenshi run there? He dunked on Smith for running in a constituency that wasn't her own, but we really need him in the legislature. The dunking on Smith probably wasn't the best move because the only seat that's available to Mr. Nenshi now is the one in Edmonton Strathcona. And it is, if you're going to talk about safe NDP seats in the province, excuse me, if you're going to talk about safe NDP seats in the province of Alberta, that's probably one of the safest. Head Nenshi has announced that he will be running in Edmonton Strathcona. He put up a little statement addressing that, as well as some of his reasons. As you know, with our former leader, Rachel Notley's retirement, I have an opportunity to join our MLAs in the legislature. I believe Alberta New Democrats can be a thoughtful government in waiting with real solution for Alberta's families. That's why I'm officially announcing today that I'm putting my name forward for nomination as the Alberta NDP candidate in Edmonton Strathcona for an upcoming by-election. That doesn't mean I'm leaving Calgary behind. While still proudly Calgarian, I'm already dividing my time between the two cities, and I look forward to learning more about Edmonton. The nomination means that I'll be in the legislature to go head-to-head with Danielle Smith soon. The nomination meeting is January 22nd, but there's a pretty big window for Danielle Smith to actually call the by-election. the latest it could be, theoretically, could be June. So depending on how long Danielle Smith wants to sit on the by-election, it could be a while before Mr. Nenshi gets into the legislature. Just a couple more left, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for our regular open mic. If anybody wants to tap in, you can join us on the Twitter Spaces, and we will do our best to make sure that anybody who wants to say some things. If you took issue with something I said tonight, then you can absolutely say, "Hey, I think you got it wrong. Here's my receipts." And if you don't, that's okay too. And it might just be a really short episode tonight, and that's also okay because the 2.5 hour Lord of the Rings ones gets to be a little bit much. Our last piece that we got to talk about, which is kind of just fun, is we're talking about True North again. Now, this dovetails into a bigger story that we're going to be working on over the coming weeks about the right-wing media ecosystem. And the fact that the right-wing media ecosystem, as much as they like to say, oh, the Trudeau-funded media, it turns out more often than not, they're funded by conservative governments. It's just on a provincial level. We were able to demonstrate that with Western Standard. We've got a couple more that we're looking to demonstrate that with as well. But there's no question the True North has received an unprecedented amount of access to Danielle Smith in the UCP from the very beginning of Danielle Smith's leadership race. So we got to talk about the True North for a sec, because it was literally yesterday that True North tweeted this little gem out, referring people to their website and their channel. Gwen Morgan, one of Canada's most senior executives in the natural resources industry, joins Harry Faulkner to break down some of the problems with Canada's unions, and provide some solutions that might work for everyone involved. Now, I watched a bit of the episode. I took the bullet on this one. And it's exactly what you would expect. It basically, the first 2 minutes is Harrison Faulkner saying, unions, they're the worst. Every year, Canada Post screws us at Christmas. And then every year, the teachers screw us right before school goes back. Apparently, Harrison is unaware that there's usually these contracts are like 4 years. But whatever. And then he goes on to say, so we're bringing in an expert. He's a supporter of True North, and he's donated to us. But that doesn't really cover off the scale of it, because as soon as we saw that he had Mr. Morgan on, we were immediately reminded of this story. This was a story that came out from DeSmog a little while ago, and the story was that Mr. Morgan, the former CEO of Vancana, who doesn't believe in addressing climate change, he's donated over $500,000 to True North. So it's not like you're just a little bit of a supporter. It's not like, you come to the events, you throw a $5 into the hat every once in a while. This is over $500,000. And apparently that gets you a guest spot to talk about unions, despite not having any announced background in unions. So that was cool. And we double checked. And sure enough, True North is still a registered charity, which conceivably means that that's a hell of a tax write-off for Mr. Morgan and his foundation for that $500,000 of donations. It's fun how money works. And I think that's pretty much what we have for tonight. I'm gonna vamp for a second. I'm gonna plug all the things, and then if anybody wants to tap in on the Twitter Spaces, they can. And if they don't, this will be a nice short episode, nice light episode before everything gets terrible again. So plugging through the things, got a couple of things that we need to plug. The first one, obviously, it's a big event for us. What did I get for Christmas? Well, I got a $6 million lawsuit. So yes, I and The Breakdown are being sued by the importer of the the Turkish Tylenot. He's also the importer of the Vanch masks. He's received over $250 million in business from the provincial government while the UCP has been in power. And he also is the host of many ministers and allegedly staffers at his skybox in Edmonton. He doesn't like that we talked about those things. And so just before Christmas, he sued me for $6 million. We have set up a legal fund. It's doing very well. And I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's contributed so far. If you want to help us fight back, and boy, howdy, are we going to, then you can fire a donation off at www.savethebreakdownab.ca. You can also send e-transfers to the info at thebreakdownab.ca. And then, as always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, you can sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. So much breakdown AB in that closing. We do also have all of our merch you can get our merch at AB Poly. The link will be in the show notes for this episode, whether you're listening to the audio version or the video version of the podcast. Do the liking and the subscribing and all of those good things. And I think that's it. I think tonight we just had a nice short little episode. I'm just going to quickly check the chats. And make sure that I'm not missing anything major there. I'm not used to them being so short. It's very disorienting. There we go. Yeah, I think we're all caught up. So that's it for this week. We don't have an interview episode this coming week. We will be back next Sunday with another live episode. We're going to take a little bit. We have a couple of interview episodes we're doing here and there for January, February, but we've got a couple of big projects that we want to focus on. One of those projects is the deep dive into the funding that gets pushed to the right-wing media, like the Western Standard, like the Counter Signal, like maybe the True Norths. We got a big project that we're working on there. We got some FOIPs pending there. We also have a couple of other FOIPs pending that are going to be really, really spicy. We are currently having we built a bit of a red team. For anybody who's unfamiliar, a red team exists to say, here's what you've got wrong. We built a bit of a red team because we got some results back on some testimony that a certain minister provided at a Senate hearing. And it's fascinating how complicated that is. So we got some folks taking a look at that. We're going to be bringing that forward. And then the big ambitious project they're going to be working on for the first quarter of this year is going to be a whole big thing on the coal mines. For anybody who's unfamiliar, Brian Jean and Rebecca Schultz did a great job of saying, hey, everybody, we're going to make all of these rules for no new coal mines in the Rocky Mountains. We won't have any new coal mines on the Rocky Mountains. We won't allow it. Those old ones, though, that we've had for quite some time, we're going to let those go ahead. Totally, we're going to let those go ahead. So when we're talking about Grassy Mine, when we're talking about North Back, when we're talking about the Australian billionaire who has a alarming, let's say, environmental record, we're going to be doing a whole big project on that to try to raise some awareness on it, because it's certainly something that people need to be more aware of, because they're putting the entire water supply, in effect, of Southern Alberta at great risk. So we got some irons in the fire, is what I'm saying. So we're going to go light on the interview episodes for the next little bit. We will be here every Sunday for our live Alberta Politics Roundup. We will be here next week for our live Alberta Politics Roundup. And that's it. I don't have anybody who's wanting to raise their hand tonight. I know there's lots of events going on. I know everybody is expecting Trudeau to quit tomorrow, or at least announce that he's quitting and triggering a leadership race or proroguing Parliament or something to that effect. But I do want to quickly just say, I hear rumors. I do. And I hear rumors that a local independent journalism group called Livewire is going to be dropping a story tomorrow morning. I'm very interested in that story because I think that it's very important. if it has to do with what I'm hearing it has to do with. I think that you should all be paying very close attention to it. And you better believe that we're going to spend our morning and afternoon and evening and probably the rest of the week doing everything that we can to amplify it, because it's all about the trains in Alberta. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going to play the clip. Never gets old for me. I don't know why. It just fills my cup up. And then we'll wrap it up.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend
to... I'm sure that for like so much of our audience, there's people out there who are like, stop playing the damn clip. But I will never, ever, ever get tired of that second nod. It's so good. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's in the chat. I see that somebody just subscribed on Patreon and did the little smiley face. Thank you so much. Happy New Year to everybody. Love the community that we have in our chat. My favorite thing to do while I wait for the episode to download so we can post it everywhere is to go through the chat comments, because you guys are just fantastic. So huge thanks to the chat. Huge thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. Huge thanks to everybody who has been supporting us through the Legal Defense Fund. And I just want to be really, really clear. We've hit our goal, which is fantastic. I'm confident with where we are, but I've had a lot of people say, but I still want to contribute. I still want to support, because I want to make sure that you guys are able to take this thing all the way to the wire. We are absolutely going to take this thing all the way to the wire. So thank you to everybody who's been supporting the last 2 weeks. I had a conversation with somebody last night and they were asking, like, so how are you doing with all of this? How are you feeling about all of this? And it's just so... The response and the support has been so big that I am currently incapable of processing it on an emotional level. So I just want to say thank you to everybody there who has supported, everybody who I know can't, because we do have a significant chunk of our audience that does not have the financial means. I don't want anybody feeling bad about that. The liking and the sharing and the stuff has been huge. We're getting a website refresh from somebody who is able to do that, but they don't have the means to throw big chunks of money at the legal defense. That is all. Y'all are just so fantastic and wonderful. So I wanted to say that, and that's my story. Thank you, everybody. We're going to be back next Sunday. And in the meantime, and in between time, as always, keep the conversation going.